Hi, everybody. Welcome to your grammar video for Grammar 5.1, which is, as you can see, because it's in English, present tense of reflexive verbs. Make sure before you try to watch this video that you've read pages 152 to 155 in your textbook. They really do a decent job of showing, but not explaining in depth, the difference between reflexive and non-reflexive verbs in Spanish. Conceptually, the difference is this. An action is reflexive when the person doing the action and the person receiving the action are the same person, okay? This is often, but not always, expressed via pronouns that end in self or selves in English, as in, my son dresses himself, right? He does the action to himself. The actant and the recipient are the same person. And of course, that's being contrasted with, I don't dress him anymore, right? Or another example, do you usually make yourself dinner? Are you the person who does the action and the person who receives the action, right? This is reflexive. Or non-reflexive contrast, is it that somebody else makes dinner for you, right? In that case, the person performing the action, making the dinner, someone else, and the person receiving the action, you, would be two different people. And that action would be non-reflexive. We're going to look at this a lot more. So let's look back then at the sentence, my son dresses himself. In that sentence, the person performing the action, my son, and the person receiving the action, my son, are the exact same person. This sentence would require the reflexive verb vestirse in Spanish. And the Spanish sentence would be, mi hijo se viste. The se in that sentence is the Spanish reflexive pronoun that means himself in this context. The word se has many other possible meanings, okay? But in this particular context, that se is a reflexive pronoun and it means himself. Let's contrast this with the sentence, I dress my son, okay? Here, the person performing the action, I, and the person receiving the action, my son, are two different people. This sentence would use non-reflexive vestir in its Spanish version. And let's look at that. Yo visto a mi hijo, right? There is no reflexive pronoun before the verb. There's no me here after yo and before visto. There's just the subject pronoun yo. And that's because I'm being emphatic here. I am indeed saying, I dress my son, right? So let's practice some greater awareness of reflexivity with a few more English sentences, because this is something that is so natural to us in our first language that we don't even think about it, okay? What I want you to do is decide whether the sentences below would use reflexive verbs in Spanish. Our criteria for this is that the person performing the action and the person receiving the action are the same person, right? Actant and recipient have to be the same person for the action to be reflexive. The trick is, in English, it's not always overt when we do actions to our own selves. Sometimes it's sneakier. We do not always include a pronoun that ends in self or selves, okay? So let's look at that. Here's a sentence. The father bathes the baby. And all we do is decide if the recipient and the actant are the same person. So here's our actant, the person performing the action, that's father. And here's our recipient, baby, person receiving the action. Those are not the same people. This action is not reflexive. But here's a sneaky example. We have the sentence, the father takes a bath. Well, he performs the action, right? And he does it to himself. He bathes himself. He receives the action, even though that's not overt. Sorry. It's not overt, right? We don't normally say he bathes himself. But this action truly is reflexive in nature. Another example that's sneaky. I comb my hair. Well, I'm performing the action, I'm doing the combing, and I'm doing the receiving. It's my hair that's getting combed. Indeed, this action I'm doing to myself. This is a reflexive action, even though there is no pronoun that ends in self in the sentence, right? There's just the possessive adjective my. So this is something to really be careful of. Don't always think that our reflexive sentences in English have a pronoun, myself, yourself, himself, herself, ourselves. It's not always going to have a pronoun that ends in self or selves in it, okay? And then one last one. In the sentence, I comb my daughter's hair, right? We ask ourselves, okay, is the actant and the recipient the same person? So the person performing the action is I, and the person receiving the action is my daughter. This is not the same person, right? The actant is I, the recipient is daughter. This action is not reflexive. And again, this is just a practice to get us used to thinking about who's performing the action and who's receiving the action, because this really is something we do not consider in English. All right. So let's look at the difference between reflexive and non-reflexive sentences in Spanish. Here's our non-reflexive example. The father bathes the baby, right? The actant is the father, the recipient is the baby. This sentence is not reflexive in nature. And indeed, here's our Spanish sentence. El padre baña al bebé. Notice, there is no reflexive pronoun before the conjugated verb baña. Of course not. This is a non-reflexive sentence, right? Let's look at this sentence. The father takes a bath. As we already established, he's doing this to himself. He is bathing himself. This action is reflexive. So look at the Spanish sentence. El padre se baña. What do we have right there before the conjugated verb? We have the reflexive pronoun se in front of the verb baña. That se is the himself. But unlike English, where we put our pronoun after the verb, right? In this case, the reflexive pronoun goes before the verb because Spanish word order is different than English, as we're going to talk about a ton this semester. Okay? Let's keep going with this. I comb my hair, right? We already established that I am doing this to myself. I'm performing the action. My hair is receiving the action. My hair is part of me. Thank goodness it's still attached to my head. And so let's look at our sentence in Spanish. Yo me peino. Look at that right there. There's our reflexive pronoun me, right? Also note that it's fine to just say me peino. You can drop the subject pronoun yo. It's not necessary here. What we do absolutely need, because this action is reflexive, is our reflexive pronoun me. These are two different parts of speech, just like I, the subject pronoun in English, and myself, the reflexive pronoun in English, are two different parts of speech, okay? Again, this action is reflexive. What crops up in front of the conjugated verb? A reflexive pronoun. And one last non-reflexive example, right? In this, I am the actant, but my daughter is the recipient, so this is not reflexive. Let's look at the Spanish sentence. It's just peino a mi hija. Again, let's pay some attention to grammar. Note that there is no, whoops, that didn't highlight the right thing. There is no reflexive pronoun here before peino. Of course, I'm not doing this action to myself. I am doing it to my daughter, right? This action is not reflexive. There's no reflexive pronoun before the verb. Why don't I have yo before peino? Because I don't need to be emphatic, right? The only possible subject for peino is yo. And Spanish is a pro-drop language. It wants that subject pronoun out of there whenever possible, and it's certainly possible here, right? So again, this sentence right here is not reflexive. The actant and the recipient are two different people, and because it's not reflexive, there is no reflexive pronoun me in front of our conjugated verb beino. All right, let's keep going. So, the nuts and bolts of conjugating reflexive verbs in the present tense in Spanish. First of all, when you are working with a reflexive verb, you must always include a reflexive pronoun as part of its conjugation, and you can easily identify reflexive verbs in Spanish. They will all have a se tacked onto the end of their infinitives, okay? So, before you conjugate any reflexive verb in Spanish, you have to include its reflexive pronouns, and let's quickly review what those are. Again, they are me, te, se, nos, and se. After you've got the reflexive pronoun taken care of, then the next thing you need to do is conjugate each verb in the present tense. Now, in order to do this, you have to know which reflexive verbs stem change in the present tense. For that, you need to see textbook page 161. Whenever you get a new verb that stem changes, the textbook will always tell you A, in the first place, that it does stem change, and B, what kind of stem change it has, okay? If it doesn't tell you that a verb has a stem change, it doesn't have a stem change. See how that works? All right. So let's look at this with a verb that we already know, but that you were never told was reflexive, which is llamarse. Notice, this is a reflexive verb. Its infinitive has a se at the end of it. So for each conjugated form, I'm going to show you below. The reflexive pronoun is bolded. Oh, that was really Spanishy for no reason. The reflexive pronoun is bolded, because I'm speaking English, and the conjugated present tense ending is in italics to help you out. All right, so let's look at, if the subject is yo, then the conjugated form of this reflexive verb is me llamo, right? Me is our required reflexive pronoun. Llamo is our conjugated form of the verb. If the subject is tú, the present tense form of this verb is te llamas. Again, te is the reflexive pronoun, and here is our conjugated form, llamas. Altogether, te llamas is the tú form of reflexive llamarse in the present tense. All right. If the subject is third person singular, that is él or ella or usted, the conjugation is, here's our reflexive pronoun se, plus our conjugated form, whoops, didn't highlight one of the L's, llama, all right? Se llama is the third person singular form in the present tense of the verb llamarse. If the subject is nosotros or nosotras, the conjugation is nos llamamos. Here's our reflexive pronoun nos, right? And here is our conjugated verb, again with one of our L's not highlighted, llamamos, right? It's just stem llam plus ending amos. That's how we make conjugated verbs, stem and ending, right? And finally, if our subject is third person plural, ellos, ellas, ustedes, the conjugated form is se llaman. Again, se is our reflexive pronoun, and then our verb conjugates third person plural and is llaman. All right? Makes sense? Need a sip of coffee. Let me get that. So, some step-by-step instructions for conjugating reflexive verbs in the present tense. Step 1, always deal with your reflexive pronoun first. To do that, of course, look at the subject, which will be located to the left of the verb. If the subject is not yo or tú or nosotros, or equivalent to nosotros, like mi amiga y yo, because anybody plus and I is we, right? If the subject is not yo, tú, or nosotros, your reflexive pronoun will be se, because if it's not yo, tú, or nosotros, you have a third person subject. And our third person reflexive pronoun, whether that subject is third person singular or third person plural, is se. All right? If the subject is yo, your reflexive pronoun is me. If the subject is tú, as we just saw with llamarse, your reflexive pronoun is te. And if the subject is nosotros or equivalent to nosotros, your reflexive pronoun is nos. Bien? Bien. Let's keep going. Once your reflexive pronoun is safely in place, then you just conjugate your verb in the present tense. And these are the steps you follow. First of all, as always, you derive the stem by removing the AR, ER, or IR infinitive ending. Then you rely on your studying to know if the verb that you're working with stem changes or not. That's the only way you're going to know. If the verb doesn't have a stem change, great. Leave the stem the heck alone and move on to step 3. If the verb does stem change, but the subject is nosotros or equivalent to nosotros, that's also great because, again, you get to leave the stem alone. Nosotros forms never show a stem change in the regular present tense, and that's what we're working in. So if the subject is nosotros or its equivalent, also leave the stem alone and move on to step 3. If the verb you're working with does stem change and the subject is not nosotros, then before you do another thing, you have to make the correct change to the stem vowel. Okay? So if your verb stem changes and the subject is not nosotros, before you add any conjugated ending, you must change the stem vowel in the way that the change requires of you. It's either going to change from E to IE, or O to UE, or E to I. And in the case of jugar and any verb derived from it, it'll change from U to UE, but that is a very minor stem change. Anyway, no matter what you did to the stem, you finish by adding the correct conjugated ending for the subject and for the type of verb, AR, ER, or IR, that you're conjugating. Hello. So let's look at an example. We have this sentence, right? Here's our subject over here on the left. Here's the verb we're going to be working with right here. This is just an adverbial of frequency. We're going to ignore it because it has no bearing on our main task. It's just there because I like to give you complete sentences most of the time when I give you examples. All right, let's follow some steps. Step 1, deal with this here reflexive pronoun. You have to do this. So to do this, we look at our subject and we say, okay, is my subject yo, tú, or nosotros? Oh, it's tú. Well, since it's tú, my reflexive pronoun has to be te. And we write that in the blank. Next step, conjugate this here verb, afeitar, in the present tense. Well, this is not hard. So first thing, we derive the stem by removing the AR infinitive ending. So now we have our stem, afeit. Right? Great. We have to remember whether or not this verb stem changes. It does not. Awesome. That means we leave that stem the heck alone and we go on and add the correct present tense ending for this AR verb. Our subject here is tú, and so our present tense ending when the subject's tú for all AR verbs is AS. Right? I'll show you that right here. And so to stem afeit, we add ending AS, because that's all conjugation is, stem plus ending. And there, that's it. Our complete answer is te afeitas. Te is our reflexive pronoun. Afeitas is the actual conjugated form. Both elements are necessary to complete this reflexive verb's conjugation in the present tense. And one more example. So, again, we have our subject, right here on the left-hand side, mi madre. We have the verb we're going to deal with right here. And then we have a time phrase. We don't need to pay any attention to that. It's just there because I like to give you complete sentences most of the time. So step number 1, we go and deal with the reflexive pronoun. Of course, this is our first task. So we come over here and we look at our subject and we say, is my subject yo, tú, or nosotros? No, it's not any of those. You know what? We know automatically then that our reflexive pronoun has to be se. And we write that in the blank. Done. Now it's time to conjugate this verb in the present tense. We start like we always start. We derive the stem by removing the AR infinitive ending. So this gives us our stem, acost. Great. Now we have to rely on our studying to remember whether or not this verb stem changes in the present tense. It does. We know this because we studied the material. The change that it has is O to UE. Great. Now we have to decide whether that stem change is going to happen. And to do that, we check to make sure that the subject is not nosotros. It is not. Okay, because of course, madre does not equal nosotros. Nope, in no way, shape, or form. So that means we have to make our change. And so this stem O becomes a UE. That's what a stem change is. It's an alteration to the stem vowel in a precise way. All right? So now we have our changed stem, aquest. To this change stem, we can add the correct present tense ending for this AR verb. Our subject is third person singular madre. Our third person singular present tense ending for all AR verbs is a, right there. Okay. To change stem aquest, we add the conjugated ending a, right? Because that's how we pronounce a in Spanish. And we get aquesta. That's it. Nothing else. And altogether, our complete answer, the correct third person singular present tense form of this verb, is se acuesta, where se is our reflexive pronoun, right? And acuesta is the conjugated form of this verb. Okay, guys, I hope that this helps you with the grammar in 5.1. And of course, if you have any questions, if you're my student, you know my email. Just email me. Thank you so much.